Tonight, you will go one-on-one with The Undertaker.
What's up, guys? Welcome to One on One. It's your boy Nash, and today I'm sitting here with Kyle, another fellow wrestling fan, and we're just going to have a great talk about wrestling, something that you guys are going to be interested in. But before I go any further, guys, remember to smash that like button, share this video with all fellow wrestling fans, and most certainly, if you're new, hit that subscribe button and turn on those bell notifications so you will be the first to know whenever we hit the airwaves. This show is called One on One, and for those of you who don't know, it's actually named in honor of the longest running SmackDown general manager, Theodore R. Long, who always used to tell the guys that in tonight's main event, player, you're gonna go one on one with The Undertaker. But right now, I'm gonna go one on one with Kyle. Not in a match, but in a conversation that's going to intrigue some of you, I guess, because it's a topic that a lot of people have talked about over the years. But we're going to have a conversation right now. And guys, most certainly contribute to the conversation down in the comment section below. We want to hear what you guys think. But Kyle, welcome to the show, man. Just introduce yourself to all the people watching, and just a basic intro of how you came about to start watching wrestling. How were you introduced to this weird and wacky world of pro wrestling?
Nash, so firstly, you did something wrong. And actually, at some point, want you to revisit this every time I'm on the show. Because I'm the current PWC champion, and I believe I should be acknowledged as such. So I just want to put it out there for anyone who's watching this. Your champ is here. I'm not just some throwaway guest that you're going to get. So please, you know what, respect my time. Appreciate it. Because there's a lot of things we got to say here. No, I'm kidding, but thanks so much for having me. I mean, honestly, geez, I've been watching the stuff that you guys have been putting out. I've been trying to converse as much as I can, and it's just an absolute honor to be here and chatting with you guys. And I just hope that, I'm looking all glazed up, and whatever I say, doesn't just go off the top of anyone's head, and it is constructive. Look, I started watching wrestling, as a fan, religiously as a fan from about, 2009, 2010. It's actually a very funny story. It was banned in our house for the longest amount of time. I've got a little brother who's very, let's say, violent, but violent might be the wrong words, but he loved to role play with like teddy bears and dolls and make them fight and stuff like that. And, in the older, programs, you would see, they would tell you not to try this at home, and my brother tried it at home. So WWE was banned for the longest amount of time, and it just felt not cool to be a fan. I'll tell you that. People, this whole idea about it being fake, this whole thing about it just being for kids, and really just silly to watch, was a big detractor in my earlier years, and so I missed a lot of the time periods in the WWE. I have caught up since, but yeah, I got lucky. I got stuck in a very nerdy IT class who would talk about, anime, and eventually one day WWE came up. And I vaguely remember some names. I think John Cena was a big name, Randy Orton. And because that was the topic of discussion and I wanted to be inclusive of it, I did some research. I'd often pop myself into ETV. And it's so funny to say this, but looking back 10 years ago, just having Wi-Fi at home wasn't a luxury you actually had now. So I couldn't just go onto the internet and go and look at something. I think I had a BlackBerry and they gave you a BIS or whatever it was. So you're also limited in terms of what you could do there. But yeah, I think I'm at this point right now that wherever and whatever corny stuff that they put on our TV screens, I think I'm still inclined to at least keep up with it. So yeah, they've got me. They've done it. I mean, I'm a lifelong member, I guess. Funny. Anyway, yeah.
Well, actually, bringing up on the whole BlackBerry thing, I was actually under the impression I never owned a BlackBerry. My first phone actually was a Nokia X2. It's one of those keypad phones that you get. But I didn't know that there were actually limitations, because back when I was in high school, all the kids had BlackBerries and I didn't have one. And they used to tell me they have unlimited internet, which was something I didn't understand. But now you mentioned there's limitations. So I'm kind of, confused about that. But I had a similar upbringing. I used to watch Well, my parents actually were the ones who watched wrestling before I did. Back then, on ETV, they used to show WCW. So I'm actually from the WCW days watching it. In fact, a lot of people don't believe me when I say this, but I can actually remember the very first match I watched.
Mhm.
I don't remember the exact date, but I know it was 1997, and I watched the debut of Bill Goldberg against Hugh Morris. The very first match of Bill Goldberg, and I was a huge Goldberg fan. Like anytime Goldberg would come on the TV, I'd be like, "Yo, Goldberg!" and I would watch him, spear, jackhammer, all those stuff. I was so into it. But nowadays, when I see Goldberg, I'm like, "Oh, Goldberg, oh God, please retire, please retire." That's my reaction now. And not because I don't like the guy. I've always been a fan of Goldberg, and I probably always will be. But I feel like now it should be about the guys who are there now and not about the past. What WWE I think has failed to do is build current stars. And that's something that they succeeded, I feel like, not just during the Attitude Era, because I grew up, like I said, watching WCW. So I only caught really the tail end of the Attitude Era, like The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin towards the end, I'd say 2001, 2002. And that's when the Ruthless Aggression era came in. So I grew up watching the Ruthless Aggression era. I watched every single week Raw and SmackDown. And then there used to be another show called Velocity. I'm not sure if you remember that.
Mm-hmm.
So those were the 3 weekly shows of wrestling that you could watch. And I think during the weekdays, they used to do repeats of them, even when later on when they added more shows. So that's how I grew up watching wrestling. And then when I got to high school, I think a lot of passion like really took over, because that's when I started getting more into wrestling to the point, and this is gonna, I think, shock some people, but I was so passionate about it. I made cardboard championship belts. I'm a writer by nature, so I created like my own little WWE magazine, sort of, with articles about reviews of wrestling and stuff. So the whole idea of Pro Wrestling Central started way back then when I was in high school, to the point that I actually, when I was towards the end of my schooling career, I was looking at really training to become a wrestler. Like I contacted this guy named Nightmare. I don't know if you know him. He's from
No.
he's from the Chatsworth area here in Durban, South Africa.
Oh God, Nightmare from Chatsworth.
I'm actually from Overport. Well, now I stay in South Beach, but I'm originally from Overport. So I spoke to him on the phone. I spoke to Mark Beal from WWP. I spoke to Sean Cohen from AWA. And there's this other guy, I forgot his name, but he also ran this academy. It was called AWPA, Africa Wrestling Punishment Association.
Mm-hmm.
So I spoke to like 4 different guys. I really wanted to get into it, but then I had a lot of injuries. I injured my left leg. I injured my left hand. The left hand of my body is like completely fragile. So I gave up on that, but I always actively wanted to still be a part of the wrestling, world. So I even offered to be a referee. I offered to be a commentator, announcer, but eventually they didn't have any money to offer. So for me to travel to where the promotions are, do all that stuff, financially it wasn't going to work out for me. So anyways, I got a job and I started, the Pro Wrestling Central thing. But I think like a lot of the things I grew up watching is when they created the stars of today. Like, for example, Brock Lesnar. He's still a huge box office draw, but he was actually in 2002 when they were building new stars, back when WCW was no more, and now they were trying to build new stars. And so my view of wrestling and my attention of wrestling will always be drawn back to the Ruthless Aggression days, the PG era, the reality era, and then eventually this new brand split which came around. And there are going to be a lot of things that I'm going to bring up, I think, in this conversation that's going to take it a lot back to there, looking at it now, and then looking at how WWE can improve, looking back at where they came from. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to take this conversation forward with you, looking at the wrestling that we grew up watching and comparing it to it now. Where do you think WWE along the lines maybe got it wrong? Whereas, because look at it now, I think up until WrestleMania 33, which was 2017, that's when WWE started to get a huge disconnect from the fans. Before that, they still had a lot of steam. I mean, reality era, when The Rock came back, CM Punk was killing it. He really revived wrestling back in the early 2010s. They took it to the middle of 2014-15. John Cena was starting to phase out. He was starting to wind down his career. They had Seth Rollins taking the company on his back, or Roman Reigns taking the company on his back, Dean Ambrose. Basically, the Shield were the ones that were going to take it all forward. Now you're looking at when the brand split came in, it was that I feel like, and I will fight anybody on this. The last wrestling boom that we had was not 2011, it was 2016, because we had the brand split. Everything about that year, not just WWE, New Japan was killing it in 2016. A lot of these companies. So looking at from 2017, huge disconnect. I was still a fan because I loved how Jinder Mahal became champion, and only because he's Indian and I'm Indian and you're Indian. So it was like that vibe of supporting your own guy, even though he's not from South Africa, he's Canadian and he's not even from India. But you know, still,
we were intergender.
Same but different. Same but different.
Yeah.
So
no, I hear you. I agree in terms of the wrestling boom, the last one being back in 2016. It's actually funny to go and watch that right now and think, well, you know what? People are complaining about what the product looks like today. And a lot of the roster that was around in 2016 is still sort of around right now. So what went wrong? Like, well, how did they, why did they book incorrectly? Was it because of the way they were presenting certain people? Did they not present enough? Did they not give us enough fresher talent? Ultimately, these guys rewrite the wheel every generation. I know, I don't know if you're going to agree with this, but I think, just to answer your first question about where they went wrong, I think the introduction of the PG era is effectively where they went wrong. If you look at long-term sustainability, it changed the way the product was presented. It changed what it is the hardcore fans really got invested in, and that was just guys coming out here, speaking saying whatever they got to say in the way that they want to say it. Ultimately, that language barrier, being mindful of the younger audience and the kids, is really what turned the product away and made it what it is today. Obviously, from a business perspective, I understood it. I get where they went. That the kids obviously make up a lot of that income in terms of buying, shirts, buying titles, not making it, being there at the shows. A show that I went to, for example, now most recently when they're here in the country, there were kids everywhere. So I get it. And in terms of the way they presented certain people, John Cena, for example, the only reason he stayed face was to make sure that, the kids were satisfied and the kids were happy because they were they're the cash cow. But for someone who's watched since, what did you say, 1997? I can tell you why people don't believe that story, Nash. You were 3 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
How did you remember, number one? I don't even think you were saying, I don't even think you would be able to say Bull, let alone Goldberg. But yeah, I can tell you that's why they don't like that and why they don't agree with it. But sure, I mean, if that's the story you're going to take to the grave, then go with it. I wasn't there. I don't know how far your memory stretches back, but yeah. I think they lost touch. I think they lost touch with what it is their audience wanted because of where it is they were now sitting. They looked at it and they had won the war. There wasn't really a need for them to stick to the old tried and tested. They could really just develop themselves and go in a certain direction. And there was no one there realistically who was going to compete and steal as much business for them. So really they were in this position where, well, we can do what we want and this is what we want to do. And so we're going to do this. And I actually think they're in a position like that right now. Despite the the growth and the growth of popularity in the independent promotions, I still think that for the next 50 years, these guys can still go out there and put out whatever product that they want, and ultimately still be the bigger player in this industry. I don't know if you agree with that, Nash.
Yeah, man. Like, and here's the thing. Sometimes when even when I had the major players talk, I take notes when some other guy's speaking, so that I can really pick up on where you left off. You mentioned you went to the live event. Was that the one that happened in 2018?
Yeah. So I've been to 2 live events. Back in the early 2000s when they came over at the Dome, I was there, and then 2018 I was here in Midland. But I've also been to WrestleMania myself, so I have seen it. Yeah, 25.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you went to Arlington, Texas to watch that actually.
I'm very surprised that you know that, but yes, I got to see John Cena. I got to see him FU or AA. I think it was FU at the time, but it's AA now. Edge and Big Show at the same time. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's something else, but it's weird. It's very strange to watch a show because obviously when you're watching it on TV all the time, you're seeing or hearing rather, Michael Cole, Pat McAfee now. Whereas when you're at the show, I mean, you're really just left to the devices of whatever it is you think's going on. So it's a very different look and feel. But anyway, I mean, like the point I'm trying to make is that the audience is very kid centric. If there are adults there, majority of them are probably parents and they're babysitting the kids. But the cameras will show you differently. The cameras will show you the older people, just so it looks cooler to anyone watching and just validates them for doing that. But anyway, sorry. Yes, carry on about
So
your history.
yeah. The reason I know it was Arlington, Texas, because you see, when it comes to wrestling, my mind is like I am the Wikipedia of wrestling, basically. So I
Okay.
remember a lot of things that happened in wrestling. Yeah, and like you mentioned, the live events I went to actually were the one that happened in 2011 and 2013. That was the only two times that they came to the Westridge Stadium here in Durban,
Yeah.
and I attended both shows, both time with family members that went with me, and you could tell that it's a different atmosphere for the live event than it is for the TV. For example, and they strip down a lot of stuff for the live event than they do for the TV. For example, if you remember, excuse me, if you remember Sin Cara, when he
Mhm.
used to do his entrance, he used to jump
On the
and
trampoline.
spin and go into the ring. On TV, you don't see that trampoline. I saw it on a YouTube video later, but for the live event, they didn't bring the trampoline. He walked to the ring. We were all waiting for him to run, and I had my camera. I had a Nokia X2 in my hand, camera rolling,
Yeah.
and I'm waiting for this guy to run, and he's walking. I'm like, when he's gonna jump? He's walking. Oh my God, he's going up the stairs. Holy crap! I wasted film for this.
Nash,
So
I got the same feel when now back in 2018, Bray Wyatt's entrance, which is something majestic to watch. The Bray Wyatt who, obviously had the fireflies in the air and he had his lantern. So sick to watch on TV. When you're in the actual crowd, you think the lights are all going to go out. It's going to be pitch black. The only thing you're going to see is maybe Bray, a little bit of light shining on his face, and then all the phones. Mate, it's not that. That's not what you see. The stadium's still lit out. So I don't know what filter they're using to give this impression that it's pitch dark, but that is not the case. I
I
was so
think
disappointed because I took my mom, I took my sister, I took mates, I took the missus, and I was like, guys, okay, so if Bray comes, this is gonna be dope. Everyone, like, whip out your phones because you're not gonna be able to see. Not the case. Not the case. I'm sure with you and Sin Cara, if you went with family members, you were probably telling them, listen, this oak does the craziest jump into the ring. My phone's ready. I don't know why you're not recording. And my man walks to the ring. He must have looked like such a dud. Such a dud.
they strip down a lot. Like I
Mm.
think even for the TV show, the pay-per-views, they do actually put all the lights out and the people are whipping their phones out. It is pitch black dark. But for a live event, they don't feel like they need to do that much because it's
Mm.
not going to be on camera. It's not going to be on TV. Nobody's going to see this. It's just for the fans. So I feel like they lay it back a little, so they don't put as much effort into it. In fact, there's a huge disconnect because like okay, the first live event they came to, not let's not go that far. 2013, they came here. At the time on TV, ETV I think was three weeks behind on programming, so we were watching things 3 weeks later.
Mm.
I'm still watching Cody Rhodes and Damien Sandow as a tag team on TV. Here, Damien Sandow comes up without Cody Rhodes and talks about how he's going to beat the crap out of Cody Rhodes. And I'm like, aren't you guys a tag team? I had to Google it. Oh my God, they broke up. When did this happen? Two
Yeah.
weeks later. I still waited 2 weeks for them to break up at Money in the Bank before this whole
Dear.
happened. So it
So
was like a huge disconnect. And that's not the worst one. The worst one was 2011. I was still watching Wade Barrett as the Intercontinental Champion. At the time, he was feuding with Ezekiel Jackson when the core broke up.
Mm.
And here Wade Barrett comes up without the title, And here Ezekiel Jackson comes out with the Intercontinental belt. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? I had to literally Google this and find out that the title change happened on pay-per-view that happened 2 weeks before they came here. So there's a huge, but I like how later on ETV, they really pulled up their socks, so to speak, and they brought us up to speed. So we were only a week behind. And then now when Supersport took over, they are showing it live as it happens and then repeat on the day. So now we are more or less on par. And with the advent of the WWE Network, even though episodes of Raw are still 3 weeks behind, we are still able to watch a lot of the pay-per-views, the 205 Lives, all these shows live on the network. And here in South Africa, we still have the WWE Network as compared to America. Now they're watching things on this new streaming service called Peacock.
Yeah.
So we're still at least a little privileged to have the network. I think I unsubscribed from the network a few years ago because I didn't find any value in it. And I was venturing out into watching other promotions, and I found them to be much more entertaining than WWE. I'm not sure if you can relate because I know you watch mainly WWE because you don't find the appeal in other promotions. But I'm going to bring in a lot of reference from WWE and compare it to outside promotions because I'm sure there are a lot of people watching this video right now that do watch other promotions, so they can also take that kind of contrast in. So yeah, those are the live events I went to. And like you said, they had to change because of the fans. The kids are 100% their cash cows. They buy all the colorful John Cena shirts and caps and armbands and what other types of ridiculous merch they have out there. And I'm actually surprised that WWE actually pulled the trigger for what we were waiting for years, which is the Roman Reigns heel turn. They were so stuck on making Reigns the face that, and I don't think he was making as or selling as much merch as Cena was back in his day. So I think they found it apt that during the coronavirus pandemic, when now they didn't have fans that buy merch, they were having it behind closed doors, they could actually pull the trigger, make Reigns a heel, and run with it. So that's why I think they finally pulled the triggers, because they couldn't sell merch at shows because they were doing it behind closed doors. There's no fans. But now the fans are back. I say give it until maybe after WrestleMania, and you're gonna see Reigns do a face turn. That's and let me give you a Paul Heyman line. That's not a spoiler. That's a no wait. What did he say? Sorry. I got that wrong. That's not a
great man. You can't quote him.
That's a spoiler. I can do a pretty good Paul Heyman impression. Mike wants Brock Lesnar. But like you were saying, yeah, we're gonna skip that whole part. Like you were saying, yeah, WWE, they are the McDonald's, they are the Coca-Cola. Nobody can touch them. They are always going to be on the top for at least the next 50 years, like you said. And I don't see AEW taking over them. I think the closest anyone ever got close to toppling them was WCW with the NWO storyline. Yep. You will never, ever get that close to toppling them ever again. Because, and I don't know if you know this, a couple of years ago when Major League Wrestling was coming up, it's an indie promotion, MLW. They had a lot of these popular indie stars, sort of like what AEW is now, but a little bit more. They had ACH, you'll know him from WWE as Jordan Miles. They had that guy there. They had a lot of these huge stars, Jungle Boy, Luchasaurus, Brian Cage, all of them packed up in MLW. And when WWE saw that, they started picking the talent out of there. So that's how we saw ACH become Jordan Miles. They took him to WWE. They took Shane Strickland from MLW, put him in NXT. Now he's Isaiah Swerve Scott. They took all their talent to try and stomp out what could possibly be the next WCW, almost, but not quite. So WWE will always be ahead of the curve. If anyone is trying to take over, they'll always be ahead of the curve. The only way that they cannot be ahead of the curve is if someone's financially backing a project, such as Tony Khan with AEW. And I don't think AEW is ever going to come close to toppling them, especially with the way they're going. Cody Rhodes with his golden shovel, the booking's a bit repetitive. So while AEW started off hot, now they're starting to go into a downward trend, and WWE is just going to pick up the ball and run with it. And NXT is huge, and other promotions, but I think NXT, if you watch an episode of NXT and you watch an episode of Raw, you can easily see why NXT is a bit better than Raw. And I put it down to Vince McMahon still being in that chair. Say what you want to about the man. He was a revolutionist, you know. He was a bit of a maverick. He took out all the other promotions, took them all out of the game, and now he could be the only game in town. But there comes a certain stage where McMahon, I think, kind of lost it. And I think it's when the PG era dawned. When John Cena went to, and then I don't know if you've seen the John Cena documentary,
Yep.
He went to Vince McMahon and said, listen, there's a whole lot of kids coming in now. So in order for us to keep that going, I need to drop the rapping gimmick. Because if you remember the rapping John Cena, the basic thugonomics John Cena, he was not PG by any means. His lyrics were very, how do I put it, still attitudey, to put it lightly. So he had to drop that gimmick, and that's when he started getting more colorful to appeal to the kids, because he didn't need a sales report just to tell him that there are more kids. He could hear it in the crowd every night that he was going out there. So that's why they had to change. But at the same time, I think the change, it didn't sit well with McMahon. He's a businessman at the end of the day, right? He likes to see where the money comes in. He's not afraid to get in the ring and take a punch if it draws a crowd and gets him more money in the bank at the end of the day. So like that's where they had to do it. So there are appropriate fans, like there are still the older generation, such as myself, even older than us, younger than us, males, females, all the different kinds of fans. But at the end of the day, they have to go with where the sales are going. And nobody will say this, but there was a point when CM Punk was, you know, the star of the show. He was outselling John Cena in merch sales. So that shows that there are still older generation fans in there who are not John Cena fans, right? They're not going to buy the Cena merch. They bought the Punk merch. So there are still older generation fans there. But John Cena came back the very next few months and he outsold CM Punk again. Because why? They turned CM Punk heel, and I think that was a huge mistake. They could have gone so much further with Punk had they not turned him heel. But at the end of the day, like you said, the change had to happen because of the fans. But at the end of the day, there are still fans like us who watch the product. So from our point of view, and I want to bring you in on this, how do you think they could keep the way they are, right? To draw in the fans that they already have, but still appeal to us? How do you think they could do that?
So the change to the PG era had a ripple effect on the model of wrestling, of pro wrestling, and the way of their presentation of certain superstars, certain feuds, so on and so forth. I say this because if I'm sitting in a crowd at a Raw or a SmackDown, and I've got this group of, I don't know, 6 to 10-year-olds who are chanting "Let's go Cena," I, as a 27-year-old man, am not gonna go on and chant with these 6-year-olds. Just from a I cannot be seen to be doing that. Let me say that. And those same kids who are chanting for John Cena are also chanting for whomever the next biggest babyface is. They're going on with whomever that person is. So it became a thing of, it's not cool to go on and cheer for the babyface because of the kids backing of that superstar. And this is why the mold of if you strip pro wrestling down to its bare bones, it's effectively bad guy wins again until a good guy, you know, gives him his comeuppance, right? That's effectively what it is. And that's how they build, and that's how they made bigger superstars. The Rock had his rival, you know, Stone Cold had his guy, Hulk Hogan, you know, had his many guys, and John Cena had his. And then when it became not cool to cheer for the good guys, we were now cheering for heels. And so at any point where a babyface is now thrown at us and he's not going to sit well. Roman Reigns, for example, they thought that's what they needed to do because it's been tried and tested throughout their history. We're going to make him the top babyface, have him overcome every heel, come out there and try and appeal to the kids. And that didn't work because, again, he's going to get booed. That's what it is. Now you've got these kids who are sitting there, wondering why are we booing Roman Reigns? Why are these people booing Roman Reigns? He's being good. He's not using, the steel steps to cheat and win. He's not saying bad things about this guy's, I don't know, wife or mother. So why are we booing him? And that's changed. that in effect is the reason why Roman Reigns as a bad guy, as a heel, is so much more appreciated by the fans because of, I guess, the image of the fans and how it is they're going to be perceived by cheering for the good guy. Now when John Cena comes back, remember, now we're not popping for John Cena that, is in his prime, cutting promos in the middle of feuds, being this overall, Super Saiyan, Superman, godlike type character. Now we're looking at a legend that's returned that we're all familiar with. We respect the work that he's done, and we're okay to now, pop for someone of this magnitude because we're just so excited to see him again, try and understand what he's going on about. If anyone watching, go and check out Vass's rumor mill because he makes mention of John potentially being here up until WrestleMania. That's 9 months. Nash, I tell you, I'll give it 2 months. Not even less. Let's say a month and a half. John Cena's, we're going to get the Let's Go Cena sucks chance at some point because this whole, this nostalgia effect is going to disappear. I mean, I felt it now on Raw. I mean, on SmackDown, I was sitting down with the missus. We were catching up on what happened last night. Within 3 minutes of John's promo, we're already sitting there like, all right, get to the point, buddy. Like, we're bored now. Whereas his promo on Raw, we literally sit there, big eyes, wanting to hear what he's got to say up until the very point that he leaves. I wasn't even disappointed that he doesn't come out at the end of SmackDown because I didn't want to see him come and respond and, spew the same garbage that he has been, as Roman put it. And, that's now, like I'm saying, it goes back to the point of they made it not cool to cheer for the good guy anymore. And that's why the entire mold has got to change. And they're effectively, in terms of booking, in terms of presenting storylines and superstars, have to rewrite the wheel on how they do it. And, they've got it right in one aspect with Roman. And I think Triple H understands that down in NXT, which is why you're saying it already seems better because they understand that and they've adapted to it in that they're not painting anyone as a particularly good guy and a particularly bad guy. They're just themselves. That's the difference between NXT and the main roster. No one down at NXT, okay, maybe there's a few exceptions, is at one end of a scale of good and bad. Whereas on main roster, I think there's an abundance of that and people see right through it. And it makes it difficult when you've got these 8-man matches and you don't know who to cheer for because we know who's the bad guy, who's the good guy, why are the bad guys fighting each other, why are the good guys fighting each other, why is a bad guy teaming up with the good guy. Super disconnect. They've actually lost the plot when it comes down to it. So to answer your underlying question about, how do we still keep the fans but still appeal to a more wider audience, potentially people who've never watched the product before or people who have left it. Copy Triple H's mold in terms of making superstars who they really actually are and let them carry on that persona. A massive change. And I wanted to chat about this when we speak about what the difference is back 10 years ago as to now. It's just the accessibility and the reach. There are streaming websites to go and watch this thing. You can do it on DSTV, Peacock, or, any network provider. YouTube is a big thing, Twitter, Bleacher Report, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on in terms of actually catching the product and being able to watch it. But the big thing I want to talk about here is the superstars themselves are a lot more accessible through their own social media pages, through, connecting them with them on Instagram and Twitter and the way they are now being perceived. I look at Alexa Bliss, I'm her biggest fan. She's easily like in my top 3 of all time in terms of entertainment value to me. I look at the stuff that she puts on social media versus what she's doing on the show. And you're wondering, I mean, this is now Blissy, mourning over her pig or laughing while her fiance is busy playing the guitar. And then you go to Raw and, she's all dolled up. next to Lily playing this supernatural character. It doesn't work. It doesn't bode well. And that's why people don't buy into it. Where is if you look at, oh, let's use John for example. Who he is in the ring versus who he is on social media is one and the same. Xavier Woods, who he is in the ring versus who he is on various social media channels, same thing. And that's why people will buy into him. That's why they'll like his work. And when he does something, you're not thinking in your head, am I supporting this guy because he's the bad guy in the situation or he's the good guy in the situation? I'm literally behind him because I like the dude, as who he is. So I think more of that. I think allowing these superstars to go and just be more of themselves. You can position themselves or position them in terms of storylines and to a point, give them guidance when it comes to their promos and the wrestling styles that they obviously use. But at the end of the day, let them be themselves and let them be relatable. And then you'll see the rewards in terms of number one, first, just keeping the fans, and then potentially drawing in anyone new. I don't know if you agree, Nash.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think where they went wrong is trying to make superstars, manufacturing them instead of letting them grow organically. And McMahon had this bad habit of attaching a gimmick to everybody, making everybody a cartoon character.
Mm.
Let's take it way back, right? Let's take it back to the golden era of wrestling, right? The 80s. Everybody loves the 80s. Hogan was the guy. He's essentially the Cena of the 80s, basically, without all the fancy colors and stuff. So if you look at it back then, everybody, no matter who they were, they loved Hogan. They always wanted to see Hogan come out on top. Anytime Hogan was beat down, they'd be cheering for Hogan. I mean, Hogan versus Andre at WrestleMania 3. In 1987, the peak of the wrestling boom. Not a single person in that audience did you at one point hear them cheering for Andre. No, they were all cheering for Hogan. When he was taking heat, when Giant was beating him down, Hogan was taking the beating, and then eventually when the chants got loud enough, he was starting to hulk up and do that thing where he looks like he's having a freaking seizure.
Yeah.
So that everybody was behind the face, because back then, they weren't, and not to knock on anybody from the 80s who were wrestling fans or anybody from that generation, they weren't as clued up about what really was going on behind the scenes of wrestling as we are now, the fans of today watching wrestling. We love to peek behind that curtain, see what's going on backstage. We love hearing about rumors, which is why we love watching Vaz's Rumor Mill. We love, going on Bleacher Report, like you said, seeing what's happening on in wrestling and stuff like that. Back then, there was internet, but it wasn't accessible to everybody. You know what I mean? So they didn't know what was going on behind the scenes until later on, which is why that's why wrestling was so popular back then. And Vince could literally do anything he wanted because nobody was going to complain. There wasn't a social media platform where you'd get these, what do you call them now, keyboard warriors or thumb warriors, whatever you call them, hiding behind the keyboard and typing out all these things about wrestling. There wasn't any of that. So he could literally do whatever he wanted, and he could shout anything he wanted down the fans' throats. They were just going to eat it up no matter what it was. Then you come to the 90s where everybody, I don't know for what reason, WWE became the Saturday morning cartoon. Everybody was a cartoon character. Ted DiBiase was the rich billionaire. He had Virgil as his slave, which I still feel like was a bit of a racist undertone that Virgil was kind of like.
It was insensitive. It was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you had guys who, he was a dumpster guy who did dumpster by day, wrestler by night. You had a guy, I think his name was Bob Holly or whatever, race car driver by day. Everybody apparently wrestled at night and did something else during the day, which was crazy. IRS was a tax man by day, and by night he wrestled in his suit. So, and still, people ate it up. But I think the fans of the 90s really started to get a little more educated about wrestling. more especially if you look at it when NWO started coming around. Here is a guy called Diesel on WWE, right, or WWF at the time. And there's a guy called Razor Ramon. They're showing up on another wrestling show at the same time on a Monday night as Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. And everybody's like, hold on, isn't that Razor Ramon? Isn't that Diesel? But oh wait, his name is Kevin Nash, his name is Scott Hall. And they brought a lot of realism into wrestling, and they made it more, I don't know how to say it, like more believable to the fan, as opposed to when you're switching the channel and you're watching, well, we know him as Rikishi, but back then he was wrestling as the Sultan or whatever his name was. Yeah.
The trauma time, buddy.
Like I said, wrestling knowledge is.
Yeah,
so
I mean, clearly.
So
no, it's funny you say that in terms of
yeah,
like the cartoon characters, because we also had an Undertaker, and
exactly.
He's stuck. I mean, I can still say to some people today who's probably maybe watched half an episode in their entire lives, no, the Undertaker is probably one of the greatest of all time. The
Yeah.
Undertaker, what does he do? Well, he started off, digging graves and, taking names and throwing them in the graves. But yeah, I mean, he's a major star. So why did the trash guy not make it, but the Undertaker did? What is the difference? I think that's what you're alluding to now in your comparison going down the years.
Exactly. But you see, the thing is with the Undertaker, the reason why he was able to go so long is he constantly adapted and evolved. Because look at the Undertaker from the 90s, right? Now, then look at him to let's not go too recent. Let's say 2005-6 Undertaker. Similar, but not exactly the same. Look at the costume from the 90s and look at the costume from, say, the Ruthless Aggression era. There's a stark difference. You could tell. Besides the washed up picture from the 90s and the more broader HD picture from the early 2000s, you could tell that they tried to make it more or less look like a cartoon depiction of an Undertaker than compared to what they had in the Ruthless Aggression era. He was more believable at that point because his hat, the coat, the gloves, everything about him. He didn't look like he looked like a mortician, more or less, but he was believable as a wrestler because he came up with those gloves that had prime time written on it. So he looked like somebody who would beat your ass if you tried something on him. So he made it believable. Even the Biker Taker, let's go there. The Biker Taker, people bought into it because he was believable. His attire was not that of a cartoon character. And I'd even say this. The Undertaker, when he was still, before the Biker Taker thing, when he was still the Undertaker in the Ruthless Aggression era, his costume, more or less, when I look at it, looked like it was, if you take a cartoon character and you just add a little more dark essence to him to make him look like a villain, that's basically what you get. Literally, that's what he looked like. So, yeah, like I said, you stick a gimmick on a guy, but do not make it to seem like you're trying to do a cartoon out of them. And that's where they got a lot of it wrong. And that's why WCW took over for a long time until Vince woke up and realized, hey, we could do something. Let's give them attitude. And where did he get that attitude from? None other than Paul Heyman's ECW. They were doing the crazy stuff back then. They were falling off of freaking platforms through barbed wire flaming tables back then. They were doing the craziest stuff. So Vince saw that and he was like, let's get a little bit of attitude. WCW was doing more or less the same thing. Maybe they didn't have extreme matches, but NWO, sitting around a poker table, drinking beer, smoking cigars. You couldn't put your 6-year-old kid to watch that and expect him not to ask you questions. What are they drinking? Is that juice? No, son, that's beer. You'll know what that is when you're 18 years old. So that's where WCW took over. They made it more believable. I don't think that the Attitude Era appealed or was meant to appeal to just a certain type of fan. I think the Attitude Era and the era of WCW back when the NWO was running amok was meant to appeal to the realism of wrestling, not to make it a cartoon, and to tell people that these are really wrestlers. This is really a gang that will surround the ring and beat you up if you are, for the lack of a better term, let's go to the nexus, you're either with them or against them.
Yeah.
So that's where I think they got it right, was they made it a believable product. Not that they were trying to take away that whole. Vince McMahon said it best when he was launching the Attitude Era. He said, "We think that you're tired of getting your intelligence insulted. You don't believe this whole cliche of good guys versus bad guys." He alluded to that by saying, we're going to be more realistic about wrestling. So I think they could still be realistic about wrestling without it being too much of worrying about the kids. For example, John Cena used to come out with all these colorful shirts to appeal to the kids, and The Rock called him a fruity pebble. Now, when The Rock came back and the reality era came in, I feel like a lot of the fans that were lost along the way when the PG era started to come back. And when CM Punk sat on that stage and gave that infamous pipe bomb in Las Vegas, the night when his mic got cut, that brought back the influx. Punk mentions it, and I don't know if you've ever listened to the Art of Wrestling podcast where CM Punk talks about that. He mentioned that night changed the course of wrestling forever. Because all of a sudden, after he made that pipe bomb, wrestling is suddenly socially relevant. Everybody wanted to interview him. Fans were coming back into wrestling. People were talking about wrestling more than they did the year before, even though there were still amazing things happening in 2010. Besides the World Cup in South Africa, we had the Nexus running amok. And here's the big arc, the storyline arc that I want to bring in. And I don't think anyone's picked this up. When we had the Ruthless Aggression era, right? We had a brand split. We had general managers for Raw and SmackDown, right? Then, I'd say around 2010, 11, they started doing away with that brand split because SmackDown was just SmackDown, Raw was just Raw, and that was it. There wasn't like clear cut, okay, this is SmackDown, he's exclusive to SmackDown, because we used to see the SmackDown guys on Raw. At some point, every Raw became a super show, and it got dull and boring. And that's when they started off this whole arc of let's see what happens when we put an authority figure in place. So at first, it was the Raw guest hosts. Every week, there was another guest host of Raw. There was some celebrity. Half of them we South Africans didn't even know because they were all American celebrities. And then they came up with, after that whole thing ran its course, and then there was Donald Trump buying Raw, and then Vince bought it back from him, and then they had all these guest hosts again. Then we got Bret Hart. He came back after years away. He came back. Eventually, he became the general manager of Raw until the Nexus attacked him, and he was taken out of that position. And they brought in a laptop, who was the anonymous general manager of Raw.
One struggle.
Every night would be like, and I quote, and it would be like, shut the hell up, okay? So that whole thing was made because they saw what the Nexus did to Bret Hart. So in order to protect any future general manager from being attacked, somebody would sit behind a laptop and give his instructions from there, right? So that was the general manager for a long time. Then, after that ran its course, then we had Triple H coming in as the COO when Vince McMahon was trying to run Raw to the ground after CM Punk was trying to run away with the WWE title. So the board of directors impeached him. Then Triple H came in, told him that he's relieved of his duties, took his place as COO. Then John Laurinaitis came in, good old Johnny, I miss that guy, came in, tried to run Triple H out of, he eventually did, he became I am the interim general manager of Raw and SmackDown, right?
You do a much better Johnny Laurinaitis than Paul Heyman, let me tell you that.
Thank you. So he came in, then they realized, wait a minute, we still got Teddy Long on SmackDown. we need to take him out. So WrestleMania, Team Teddy versus Team Johnny. Team Johnny beats Team Teddy. John Laurinaitis is the guy who owns everything. He started throwing his weight around. Then Vince McMahon came back, fired him. Then we had guest hosts for a while. We had Vicky Guerrero running Raw one week, Zack Ryder running SmackDown, another week calling it Friday Night Zackdown. Then you came over to a period now where Triple H and Stephanie McMahon came into power. They were the authority, if you remember that one.
I do.
Triple H pedigreed Daniel Bryan at SummerSlam, made Randy Orton the champion, and that whole storyline ran for a year. They even had a Survivor Series match where the authority was taken out and Sting came back, but then they got their power back after Seth Rollins tried to curb stomp an injured Edge. So John Cena was forced to bring them back because he was the only one who had the power to bring them back.
Yes.
So the authority came back. They still ran amok. And then in 2016, Vince decided, listen, no more of this crap because, quite frankly, what's the saying from the Animal Farm? It was a storyline. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So he said, let's do away with that. Shane, you're the commissioner of SmackDown. Stephanie, you're the commissioner of Raw. You guys get general managers. Initially, it was Brian on SmackDown, Foley on Raw, and whoever runs the show better will get the keys to the kingdom at the end of the day. And I thought that was a perfect way to end that whole authority arc. Now, that was an arc that not a lot of people picked up on because we went all the way back to 2009 with the guest hosts after Donald Trump bought Raw and then brought it back. They took that whole arc all the way around. There were other storylines happening, and it ended at the brand split. Now, I don't even know who runs anything anymore. I know we have Sonya Deville running something, and Adam Pearce is there. There's no concrete authority figure. And that's what I think it's also lacking, is that sense of realism, because at the end of the day, these two guys are coming out to the ring and says, I'll face you in the main event. There's no general manager to make it official. Nobody's coming out and saying, holla holla players, tonight we're gonna have a 6-man tag team match, right? Somebody like that, like we had back in the Ruthless Aggression brand split era. We don't have an authority figure to add to that realism, if you get what I'm saying. And like you said, it became not cool to boo the face, but cheer for the heels. That goes back to the Attitude Era. Stone Cold Steve Austin was never meant to be a face. His character, Thoroughbred, was a heel. Like, nobody was supposed to cheer, but they ended up cheering for him. More especially, just like with CM Punk, people started to cheer for him after the pipe bomb more than before. People started to cheer for Austin after the Austin 316 promo. That's when they realized Austin has to be a face. In fact, it happened at WrestleMania 13. Bret Hart was a face, Austin was a heel. Going in. Coming out of WrestleMania 13, Bret was the heel, Austin was a face. All it took was one match and one event to change the entire perception of Austin. The Rock, same thing. His character, this jock who spits out rhymes and insults at his opponents, or anybody for that matter, was never meant to be a face. Because the fans were cheering for it, they had to have him as a face. And I think that's where it came out from. People cheering for the heels more than the faces, because we see the heels as cool. Because they come up there, they say what they want, they get their way, they beat up whoever stands in their way. They always have their backstops behind them to help them out if they need to. And like Edge always had his two guys. I think it was Zack Ryder and Kurt Hawkins, the Edge heads, who used to come out there. Then he had La Familia later on, being his guys who would be those guys who would beat up anyone who stood in his way. Yeah. So I think that's where the whole cheering for the heels and booing the faces came, is because we started having this perception that the heels are cool and the faces are boring. And like you mentioned about the Cena promo, it starts getting boring after a while, because Cena, he's spitting some corporate mumbo jumbo that they want him to spit. That's why Cena promos are always boring. He has to stay within the script that they give him. Not a lot of people are given that freedom. Few people are given cliff notes when they go up there. And I think back then, it was Punk and Jericho that were given cliff notes when they were doing their feud going into WrestleMania 28. They never gave them full script promos like the rest of them. They got cliff notes. You say this, you make this point, and the rest you just ad lib it as you go along. So I think if they do that, it will add to the realism. It won't sound like a manufactured promo that you've been forced to memorize like an actor on a movie set. So I think that's where that whole realism can also be added. And another thing is Triple H, I think, at the helm of NXT is doing it right. He's building guys organically. He's not manufacturing them. When he sees that something is going a certain way, he doesn't pull it back and say, no, I want it to go this way. He lets it go. He says, let's see how it goes going that way. And like his namesake, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, him being at the helm of things, I think is much better than what Vince is trying to manufacture. What Vince did was try to shove people down our throats. And it didn't work well for Cena. People rebelled continuously. I mean, if you go back to ECW One Night Stand 2006, when you were facing Rob Van Dam, that crowd rebellious. He threw a shirt in and it got thrown right back at him. That was like that was like the peak of when you realize, listen, this guy's not working. But Vince didn't listen. He continued to shove him repetitively down our throats. The reason why we are cheering for Cena now is because he's still new to us. We haven't seen him for a while. I mean, the last time I saw him was being Jacob Toretto on Fast and Furious. That's the last time I saw him. And now he's back in wrestling. It's the same effect Batista had. Batista went away. He did Guardians of the Galaxy. When he came back, we cheered him for what, a week? The very next week, he was starting being booed, but it took them a long while to figure that out. He went into Elimination Chamber facing Alberto Del Rio, a heel, and people were cheering for Del Rio rather than Batista. People were saying Batista sucks. I mean, eventually they turned him heel going into WrestleMania 30. And when he faced the Shield, I'll never forget this one. He faced it was Evolution reuniting, just the three of them against the Shield. And I don't know what WWE or Batista were thinking, putting him in an all blue suit, and everyone was like Blue Tista the whole night. They were cheering Blue Tista. It reminded me of when Sheamus came back after filming Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with that little mohawk, and everybody was like,
"You look stupid." Yeah.
So it's all about perception. We like seeing the older guys, but we don't like them taking prime spots that should be made for guys that are in their spots. Like I said, I was always a huge Goldberg fan, always will be, but I do not like him going for the title. If you're gonna bring Goldberg in, bring him in as a special appearance, bring him in as a referee, a commentator, a one-night special wrestling, whatever, but don't put him in title matches.
Yeah.
That's just stupid. That's how I feel about it. Like, that's how they could add realism from what I've mentioned. And just stop bringing in guys from the past. Build your new stars like they're doing in NXT. But I want to bring this back to you. How do you think about these part-timers coming in? How do you feel about it? And how do you think that they can create new superstars without going to the old gods?
So look, I'm not against it. I really am not against it. To see someone like an Edge come back, or a John, or if the rumors are to be believed, The Rock next year, I'm all for it. I think it depends on the part-timer that's coming in, as to what it is they can add. If you're getting The Rock back, you don't want to have The Rock feuding with, Sami Zayn in the mid-card. The Rock is there to validate an already made, let's say, main eventer, or at least just push them, up into that tier, so that when he leaves, people are believing that, this guy just beat The Rock. He looks in great shape. He could probably whoop anyone's ass. So that now leaves this guy in that space. If you've got, I didn't pop when Christian returned at the Royal Rumble, I'll tell you that, right? It was, it's Christian. It's like if Dolph Ziggler disappeared for 10 years and comes back, it's Dolph Ziggler, So, but for him, what he can add is definitely something to a mid-card. He can come back, run through, a nice little program for about 2 months or so, 2 pay-per-views. Don't overextend it, and then go. Goldberg, at this point, does not need to return. Goldberg at this point, I don't believe adds any value to anyone he faces. I tell you this, and I say this because he's lost to so many guys. He's lost to so many of their top talents that if someone beats him, it's just another check on their list. So that in 5 years' time, Michael Cole can say, you know what, um, Bobby Lashley has downed, John Cena. He's beaten Goldberg. He's beaten the Undertaker. He's beaten. It just adds to their list for for a much later time. So I'm not for some guys who are overexposed. I think Mick Foley did it, man. The guy retired and then he keeps returning. I'm like, what benefit does it serve to this superstar to beat an old, aged, out of touch, out of shape, legend? All it does is it just kills the reputation of this superstar. Now, if you've got a John coming back, and I know that we need to really appreciate the time that we have with him, because there's going to come a point where this man is just not going to be around. And for people who grew up watching wrestling in the era that we did, he played a pivotal role in the reason we're actually watching the show today. If he comes back, he's looking great. He can cut a promo. I think so. Firstly, I book him to lose to Roman Reigns at SummerSlam. I don't think that should be a question about it. But after that, if we are going to still have him until WrestleMania, this guy needs to go down to the mid card, pick up a feud with someone who needs that push, a new younger heel. Perhaps someone from the NXT brand who's coming and trying to make a name. Give him a couple matches, beat him, once or twice, and then eventually lose, and then move forward. With this guy being able to say that I sent John Cena backing. They had that opportunity with The Fiend 2 years ago, or 2 WrestleManias ago, where that's what he did. He was supposed to have been the guy who effectively, and I know everyone always returns at some point, but retired John Cena. This guy who literally gave him a complete lifelong introspection and just ripped into shreds and just put him into a vacuum of space never to be seen again, unless it's on Fast 9 or Suicide Squad, and capitalize on that. But they didn't, and they missed that opportunity. So I'm not against part-timers. It just depends. Brock Lesnar coming back and winning the title every now and again is refreshing, but then again, what happens to the title for 3 months? We don't see our champion on the show. We've seen with Roman Reigns coming out there every week with this title in hand, demanding people acknowledge him. We've seen what the effect of having your world champion there every week has. So yeah, I agree with you, and I know you're a big Goldberg fan, but I don't want to see the man. I am tired of it. Like, he looks good, cool. I guess he can add something, but I just do not see him being of any benefit to anybody. And all he's doing is he's killing his legacy. And I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I do, actually. I feel like part-timers, they're good to bring in. I mean, if you're putting them, like, okay, if Edge came back, I did not want him to be in the WWE title scene. I literally don't. I don't care if he won the Royal Rumble. Okay, put him in the title match one time only for WrestleMania. I understand it's WrestleMania, you need the big names, you need the grand gear. Okay, don't let him win the title, but let him have a good 20, 25-minute match with whomever is a champion. Make sure it's a good champion. You still have, I think, 1 or 2 pay-per-views before WrestleMania, between the Rumble and Mania, to do a title change if you need to, and see how the fans, react to him. And now, with social media so prevalent, you don't need to have an audience to tell you that. You can just go online and see how fans feel about it, and then you can decide who needs to go against Edge for the title at Mania. But don't have him win it. Edge had his time in the sun. He had a great, I think, and a lot of people may not agree with me on this, but I think Edge's career ended off perfectly when it did in 2011. He ended off on the top with the title, didn't lose it, and he walked and he left. I don't think everybody who comes in needs to go on their back on their way out, if you know what I mean. Some people can retire at the top of the game and then walk out as champion, leave the title in the ring and retire. In fact, there was a time, I think it was 2010, Sheamus actually, by the way, was never meant to be the star that quick that as he was. That whole thing of Cena falling through the table at TLC 2009 was a mistake. Cena slipped. He wasn't supposed to go through the table. He was supposed to actually do a fisherman suplex on Sheamus through the table.
Is that true? I've heard so much about it. But I mean, Cena
Look it up
slip.
online.
Okay.
Cena slip. That's actually it. Sheamus was not supposed to be champion that quick. That's why if you go back and you watch that year's Tribute to the Troops, 2009, Cena walks out as champion. There's a big strip that comes at the bottom of the screen, letting us all know that this was filmed when Cena was still champion, because they wouldn't have had to put that there if Cena didn't slip and he retained the title.
Yeah.
So, and that also brings out a thing of Cena's shovel. Cena really buried a lot of talent, a lot of really good talent. Payback 2014, everybody wanted Bray Wyatt to win, and Cena buries him in the last man standing match. Let's go back to 2010, SummerSlam, Nexus versus Team WWE. They have the domino effect, right? Nexus loses one guy, Team WWE loses one guy, and it goes back and forth. It comes down to Justin Gabriel. I'm proud to say South Africa's own Justin Gabriel.
Get in, boy.
And Wade Barrett versus Cena alone on one side. And here's a team, the Nexus, who loved surrounding the ring and beating Cena down. And all of a sudden, we're supposed to believe here's Super Cena, takes out Gabriel, and then forces Barrett to submit. And Edge himself actually said, there's an interview online, you can go watch it on YouTube, from I think it's called Inside the Ropes or something along those lines. He said that originally, even Wade Barrett is on record saying originally Nexus was supposed to win without any guys eliminated. Nexus was supposed to take out every single member of Team WWE, including Cena, was supposed to be the last guy standing and supposed to be defeated, and Nexus would stand tall. Originally with all 8 of them, but unfortunately we know what happened with Daniel Bryan. If somebody had told him beforehand, please don't go out and choke Justin Roberts with his own time, maybe he would have still got the 8th guy match.
I think
but
it worked out at the end.
It worked out in the end, him coming back as the guy who was Nexus and now against them. But it was supposed to be Nexus who wins. And then the producer, one of the producers came up to Barrett and said, listen, the main event's been changed. Cena's going over tonight. You and Gabriel will be the last 2. You will tap out to the STFU, or back then it's the STF because the FU was taken out when, Ruthless Aggression PG era. So Barrett said that he didn't believe that. So he went to McMahon's office, and the answer that he got was, it's SummerSlam, it's one of our big 4s. The kid has to go home happy, so we're going to have Cena win at the main event. He says that's bollocks. To this day, he still doesn't believe it. He feels that Cena always wanted to be on top, and that's why the Nexus lost. That's not the only story. Ryback was one of the guys who was berated by Cena numerous times, is on record. Tyler Rex, I don't know if you remember him. He's on record talking about Cena actually ran him out of the company. And Cena did the same thing to Alex Riley, A-Rai. I know a lot of people may have not liked Alex Riley, but I looked at Alex Riley as he was a superstar with huge potential. He had the look, he had the mic skills, he had the charisma, he had a really kick-ass theme song, and I will fight anybody on that. If you go and listen to Alex Riley's theme song, that's a theme song of a superstar. He had everything. I think he just needed a little bit of work on his in-ring skills, and he would have been okay. But no, Cena, kept on badgering him. And what happens when you badger someone too much? You run them away. And that's what happened. A-Rai was taken out because Cena wanted to be on top all the time. Now, when we see Cena come back, we cheer for him. Cool. We respect his reputation. Everything is done for the business. But it's not going to last very long. I think just put him against Roman Reigns at SummerSlam. Reigns has to beat Cena. I do not want to see Cena with the title. It's going to piss me off, to be honest. It's the same effect when Lesnar had the title and sat home with it for 3-4 months. I don't think Cena's going to do that, but at the same time, I've had enough. I've seen Cena on top my entire life, watching Cena's career from the time he was in SmackDown, when he accepted Kurt Angle's open challenge, and I watched him all the way through. Same with Randy Orton. I watched him all the way through. I don't want to see Cena beat Ric Flair's record and hold the title the 17th time. Sure, it would be cool You may offend the older fans, such as from the major players. I think our oldest guy is Jeremy. He's much more of the 80s guy. He'll probably be pissed off that Cena, beats Flair's record. I would be too, because Flair is a legend. Flair is on the Mount Rushmore of wrestling for a lot of people, along with The Undertaker. Just on a side note, my Mount Rushmore of wrestling is just the four faces of WWE. Mount Rushmore in America has four faces or four presidents. My Mount Rushmore of wrestling, JBL even mentioned it at WrestleMania 30. He said the Mount Rushmore of wrestling's come to life at WrestleMania 30 when we had Hogan, Austin, The Rock in the ring. I add Cena to that, and there's your Mount Rushmore of wrestling. In my opinion, just simply not because I like any of them. Okay, I'm a little bit of a fan of The Rock, but not because I like Hogan or Austin or Cena, but because they were perceived as the top guys in their respective eras. So I would say that they are the Mount Rushmore of wrestling. In fact, if you were to go into my favorites, Rock's one of my favorite legends. RVD is a favorite of mine. Shane McMahon's a favorite of mine. I'm a guy who likes the high flyers and the hardcore guys. That's just me. I'm a huge cruiserweight fan. I was so excited when they brought back the cruiserweight title. I'm disappointed that TJP was the first champion. I don't think he deserved it. I think it should have went to someone like Kota Ibushi, who came in the CWC tournament in 2016. But I digress. Coming back to it, part-timers, good for one or two matches, but don't put them in title matches. They've had their time. They don't need to be on the top again. And just to add on the last point that I mentioned, another way that you can, appeal to that larger audience and bring back that realism is with storylines. The reason why that whole, like I mentioned, the arc of authority, the reason that whole best for business authority storyline worked as well is because it's real. If you work in an office space like I do, it's real. There are authority figures. You don't like them sometimes, but you have to listen to them. You have to do what they tell you, or your job's on the line. It's real. Stone Cold Steve Austin. Let's go back to the Attitude Era, fighting against Vince McMahon. The authority, everybody wanted to kick their boss's ass. Stone Cold Steve Austin gave them that vent, that outlet. Look at him, he's kicking his boss's ass. So that also adds to the realism. Storylines are far too cartoonish. They're far too, I think, rinse and repeat. Rinse and repeat's the word. They've overused storylines to the point that there's nothing fresh. There's no new storylines they're coming up with. And Vince, I think, is the problem because he's relying on his old guard. It's the reason why he's picking up the phone, calling The Rock, picking up the phone, calling Cena, picking up the phone, calling Goldberg, because he relies on them too much, and he relies on old storylines too much. Let's look at NXT. Fresh storylines. Maybe some things you have seen in WWE, but they do it in a different kind of way. They bring out older storylines that haven't been used in decades, and they put it on TV with a fresh little spray paint on it, and it's put out there. A good example would be the Undisputed Era. When they were running NXT, it took me back, well, because I grew up watching the Nexus in my high school days, it took me back to the Nexus. I'm sure for older fans, it took them back to the NWO days. For me, it was like the Nexus again, together. Maybe because they had yellow spray paint, whatever, but it brought back that feel. Vince is relying too much on the old storylines of, here's the good guy, here's the bad guy, have them go at it, one wins, and then we see who's the next guy we can put in against this bad guy. Whoever wins, put that away, bring this other guy in. It's like a microwave. It's just going in circles. There's nothing new or fresh, and that's why the authority arc storyline that was running over all the other storylines that were happening added some refreshness to it, because there was always the authority poking their finger in there, changing something up, doing something different. And then you add the fans who, let's be honest, the fans really changed the course, not just of wrestling, but the course of WrestleMania 30. WrestleMania 30 was only supposed to be the main event, Randy Orton versus Batista for the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. That was it. Bryan threw a spanner in the works, and then we got Bryan versus Orton versus Batista for the title at WrestleMania. And I think that change happened because of CM Punk, because CM Punk really, because he walked out at the state he was, the plans for WrestleMania 30 was to have CM Punk versus Triple H, because he was gonna, the whole plan was, you remember how the Authority was picking on Punk towards the end of his career.
Yep.
Put him against the Shield 3-on-1, came out on top. They put him in the Rumble at number 1. He got tossed out at the end by Kane.
Okay.
Then it was supposed to be Kane versus Punk at Elimination Chamber. And then it was supposed to be Punk versus Triple H at WrestleMania. But because that whole thing changed, we instead got Triple H versus Bryan, and whoever won went into the title match later in the night. We all knew it was going to be Bryan. Bryan wins. Great. Fantastic. We loved it. And that's why the storylines back then even was still fresh. The fans contributed. That whole background arc contributed. They were fresh story. The Nexus was fresh. I don't care what anyone says. The Nexus was a fresh storyline that injected some much needed, oomph into the program, to put it lightly. The Nexus was a great storyline. I think even if we go to the brand split that happened, that was something fresh. That's why it was a wrestling boom, because people wanted to see a brand split. They wanted to see Shane and Stephanie, brother and sister, fighting it out. They loved Bryan back as GM. They loved Foley always as GM when he would do the cheap pop thing, Bryan with his yes chant. Everybody was into it because they made it fresh. They made it interesting. Like I said, after WrestleMania 33, things just went downhill. The storylines got stale, they got repetitive. I mean, look at when they brought back some older names. Jeff Hardy came, and Jeff and Matt, when they came back at WrestleMania 33, it was huge. People cheered for them. But where did they go after that? Because at the time, you got to understand, people were still into seeing Matt Hardy as doing this whole delete thing. But now you're bringing him like the old retro Hardys, the old Jeff Hardy, Matt Hardy tag team thing, which didn't work out so well in the end. Bobby Lashley came back. We were all expecting this mean, hardcore heel guy. Sure, we popped. We cheered for him when he came back as a face, but after a while, he got really boring.
Yep.
They put him in the mixed match challenge with Natalia, and they made him wear that little cat's band
thing.
Weird. I don't even think I want to go into the Lashley sisters. That was terrible. Absolutely. I don't even want to talk about that. So now Lashley, like I said in the Major Players video, now Lashley is coming to his own. Now we're getting the Lashley we were supposed to get. Back in 2006, Lashley had the physique, he had the look, he had everything to be a star, but he wasn't ready. Now he's got all of that, plus he's ready to break out and be that star. And I think that is why Lashley now is more. Look at what he did to Kofi at Money in the Bank. Absolutely decimated him. That's what we need. We need someone who can show that they're dominant. Going into, I think he's facing Goldberg at SummerSlam. Going into that as this big, brawny guy against Goldberg, it's going to be a clash of the Titans. So, and I don't know if you saw this tweet back when Lashley was still famous and in TNA, and Brock Lesnar came back from the UFC to WWE. People were comparing Lashley in TNA to Brock Lesnar in WWE. And some people even called Lesnar the Black Lesnar. They called Lashley the Black Lesnar. You can see the comparisons to some extent. But I think storylines, if they are kept real and they are refreshing, that's what could bring something back to wrestling, and Parttimers not being in the title scene. It doesn't always have to be like these guys say, go back to the Attitude Era and you'll get you'll recapture those ratings. And it's not about ratings anymore. Nobody cares about ratings. What are you offering the fans to keep them tuned in? So to round off this conversation, I'm going to throw this to you. What do you want to see in WWE happen that would keep you hooked on as a fan into the future? Or are you happy with the way the current trajectory of the content of WWE is going? What is your viewpoint on that?
I'm not gonna lie, I'm happy. I am pleasantly surprised sometimes by results, which I for me is the biggest thing to be surprised. I mean, if we could predict the way a show is going to go, the way our champions are going to be in over the next 6 months, what's the point in watching? So I'm okay, because what I'm seeing. Remember, I mentioned this to you, 2 weeks ago or so. The way I watch wrestling, it's not so much from a wrestling purist point of view where I want to see a specific wrestling style or I want to see booking go in a certain direction. I watch wrestling as a study. I so I'm objective in any aspect. I don't grade. You'll never see me not liking something or liking something. It's more just, okay, so why did they do this? Why are they not doing this? What are they gonna do next? I think, I mean, I can have my own views on a specific superstar, but I can tell you now there's nothing that they can do with Bobby Lashley that is going to change the way I feel about him, and that is it's boring. I'm tired of him. I don't want to see him as my champion anymore. I don't All I think about when I look at Bobby Lashley is that he was married to Lana. That's all I see. I don't get it, and he's the reason I don't still see Rusev on Raw or SmackDown anymore, because I think that was it completely buried the Rusev character. But anyway, I want to see fresh champions. I want to see the titles off Natalia and Tamina. I don't want to see Natalia in the WWE anymore, for that matter. Um, I want to see Bliss back on top. I'm glad I'm seeing John Cena. I want to see. I want to get my Seth Rollins back. That's a big thing for me. So because it doesn't help with me in terms of the study that I'm doing, that all of that time that was invested into those newer talents is now being chucked away. We made someone a main eventer, and now they're not anymore. Why is that? And why are they not being elevated to that scene? Sets an example. Any one of those actual, like anyone in the women's division who's held a championship over the last 3 years, why? Where are they now? I just want to see continuation, and I want to see things come full circle. They make a point of doing that sometimes, and they don't other times, and it's strange. So let's wrap some stuff up. Let's start some new things, and over the next 2 years, let's let it play out. But stop dropping the ball when it comes to storylines. Stop dropping the ball when it comes to character development and story arcs. That for me is the most dissatisfying thing, is someone watching it from the point of view that I'm watching it. I wouldn't rewrite the wheel. That I wouldn't. I like I said, I like the program. I'm always interested in seeing what's going on. So yeah, I think it's controversial. Just I want to go back to your golden shovel thing, because you mentioned it and you just slipped past it. You didn't give me a chance to talk about it. Man, I do not care. John is John Cena. If John Cena wants to tell Wade Barrett that he's going to go over because he feels like it, I'm all for it. John is my number one guy. He's there is a Mount Rushmore, and then there's a bigger mountain behind it. And John Cena is the only face on top of it. He is the king. He's paved the way for many superstars. He's the reason this business is where it is today. When wrestling just wasn't cool anymore, John was the guy. In his feud with The Rock, I felt it. I believed it. I was all behind him. I was legitimately, for the first time in my heart, sad at the finish of a wrestling match is when John Cena lost against The Rock. And I don't care what happened before that or after that in the way John Cena is being perceived, but he's my man. He's the guy. He's wrestling. He's the last household name that there is. And for as long as he is alive and he's coming back, that man can win as many championships as he can. I don't care that he breaks Ric Flair's record. Rick needs to be scared of Charlotte breaking that record. Let me tell you that, not John. So yeah, keep bringing him back. Keep putting him on our screens, because I want to see more John Cena. And I'm sure some people feel that same way about The Rock. I'm sure they feel that same way about Flair. I don't know. So yeah, just to get back to your answer, because I was very upset with you for that golden shovel comment. Um, he didn't make those decisions, man. Vince signs off on everything. Let's not beat around the bush with that. Yeah, look, I like where we're going. I would wrap up a whole bunch of other stories, and I think that they are in line to tell one of the best story arcs that we have seen in some time. I think we can take this to another discussion, but I think there's a reason behind Nikki ASH being our women's champion on Raw. Um, I think it's going to lead to something big if they're going in the direction I think that they're going. And I also think that this Roman Reigns situation, we need to be very appreciative of the fact that we're seeing this, because in 10 years' time, all the video clips, all the history, all the references is going to be to this moment that we're watching right now. I don't see him being bigger than this. I mean, I know you mentioned he's got a face change potentially lined up at WrestleMania. I mean, I don't see how that would happen, because for that to happen, he would need to not be the tribal chief anymore. You know, the head of the table gimmick disappears, so he'd have to reinvent himself. I don't know if you watched SmackDown, but he did allude to how when you come back, you need to have a shift in the way you think, the way you work, the way your music sounds, blah blah blah. He said that to John. And I think that if he is going to be shifting, that's exactly what we're going to see. We're going to see a different Roman Reigns. But right now, why change it? Why fix it if it's not broken? It's working fine with me. I'm glad he beat Edge. I wish he beat Edge a little bit more cleaner. But yeah. I hope I answered your question. And again, just thanks so much for having me. Man, you really know your stuff. Let me tell you that. I don't think I could ever convince you otherwise. I think your mind is made up on a lot of things, and I think it's coming from a place of, you know, a lot of thinking and a lot of thought has obviously been put into a lot of your arguments and the way you perceive it. And really, I want to get to the point where I'm like you in the sense that I can always refer back to something. I'm super jealous of your ability to keep so much product knowledge. And I mean, geez, you must have aced school. You know, you are a writer, like you said. I'm a reader. I'm not so much a writer. And, you know, I can see that you're a speaker. Nash, we could go for 4 or 5 hours. I'm sure you could. I'm sure I could literally just sit here like this, listening to everything. Play by play, 2002 to 2005, everything WWE did right and wrong. I'm sure you've done it already, man. We would have been best friends in high school. I tell you that. If I met you in grade 8 and I knew you, I swear we would have been best friends in high school. It's such a shame. Our paths are only crossing now at 27. But geez, it's been an absolute pleasure, man. I hope this is the first of many, because I'm very interested to hear your take on a lot of things.
Yeah, man. Like I would like to, us to have another conversation in the future about a lot of things. Like you mentioned, you see Nikki Ash going in a certain direction. That's a whole nother discussion on its own. So I think a future discussion would be in order. I'm with you on the Seth Rollins thing. I also want to see him back. I was a huge, and I still am, a huge Seth Rollins fan. When everyone was booing Seth Rollins when he was at the top as W champion, I was cheering him every single step of the way. I didn't want him to lose the title. Same thing with Punk. When he was champion, I kept hoping and praying every pay-per-view he doesn't drop that belt, because I wanted to see him as champion each and every single week, because he made wrestling cool. I agree with you on the point that you made about Rusev. Yeah. How he came in as this Russian guy, and I'll never forget the WrestleMania entrance he did on the top of the tent. That was amazing. And then to see how he exited, the whole Lana crap storyline that they gave. It was sad. It really was sad. And yeah, like I said, like you mentioned about continuity, nobody's asking this question, by the way. Where's Raw Underground gone to?
Oh yeah. I mean, Double Keto became Commander Aziz, and we were supposed to just not know that. I mean, I don't know what happens with Raw Underground.
Exactly.
Shane's pity excuse for a UFC promotion he always wanted to own.
Exactly. So yeah, I agree with you. They need to wrap some storylines up. They need to build new talent, stop going, in circles, and bring back the guys that were supposed to be on top, back on top, guys that can push the company forward. And I know you're speaking from the point of view of a casual fan. I am probably a complete opposite. I'm a hardcore wrestling fan. Like I'm sure you figured it out by this conversation.
Hardcore
But
is
this was-
actually putting it lightly. Let me say that. If there was a bigger word than hardcore, that would be extreme, universal. I don't know. We go on, man. God of wrestling. Cheers.
I'm the Universal
We need
Champion.
to whip out a thesaurus. Yeah, I'm sure I've got one on one of my shelves. to actually find a superlative for you. But anyway, yes, sorry, continue.
Yeah, so yeah, this was a great conversation. I enjoyed hearing your viewpoint. I'm sure the viewers enjoyed it as well. So, guys, this was one-on-one. If you guys want to see more episodes of this, show us a big like, subscribe if you're new, turn on those bell notifications, share this video with all your friends. And yeah, man, thanks, Kyle, for coming on the show. I'm your host, your boy Nash. This has been one-on-one on Pro Wrestling Central, and we'll see you guys down the road. Peace.